All right. Hello and welcome to Wise Up On Air. It's July 2020. Thanks for tuning in and joining us. How's everyone's summer going? What an interesting time. And we're just so glad that you could tune in for some exciting stuff that we got cooking today. We've got some special guests that I'll introduce here in a minute. But in the meantime, so much cool and exciting stuff happening. Just want to give you a wise up on it. The first thing is Wise 2019-24 released today. If you haven't checked it out yet, because it just came out, you should absolutely go grab it and see the cool stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the cool features there. But for those of you who have tuned into previous Wise Up hands-ons that we've done, especially the event-based packaging one, you'll know that we've been rolling out a new workflow in Unreal that brings a new paradigm shift to the way you manage assets between Wise and Unreal. And as we have rolled out additional point releases for 2019.2, we just continue to stabilize and iterate that workflow to make it the best possible resource management that it can be for you. So absolutely, if you've jumped in and started playing around with event-based packaging, circle back and see what kind of new bug fixes and stability that we've added. Also want to tip you off, if you've been checking out the spatial audio Wise adventure game walkthroughs that we've been doing as part of the Wise Up on Air hands-on series. We've talked through with special guests Mads Moretti and Tali Kakliklian, the obstruction, occlusion, diffraction, rooms, portals, geometric reflections, all kinds of really cool stuff in the first two episodes of that. And our third episode is coming up next Thursday at the same bat time, same bat channel here on Wise Up On Air. So please tune in for that. It's great to be exposing people to these spatial audio features. And episode 3 is going to dig deep into the premium plugin Reflect that offers those early reflections. So please tune in for that next Thursday at the same time. Hey, good to see folks in the chat room. Some familiar faces or tags. And thanks for tuning in. In China, we're doing an education boot camp based on the Wise 101 certification. So if you're in China tuning in, you've got some friends over there who are interested in Wise, point them at the website and get certified, get schooled up on Wise. This is an exciting time and expanding market for us. And we're just super excited to bring people into the way that Wise works and just continue to empower people to create dynamic and interactive audio with Wise. Some other really cool blogs coming out here recently, and to folks out there who have bright ideas, we're always looking for people to contribute. We had a blog from Eric at Sonic Bloom talking about proactive audio, so the two-way street of communication between the game engine and audio engine, and that bi-directional influence that you can enable. Aaron Brown talking Wise MIDI basics, fantastic overview of using MIDI and some of how he used it in Super Lucky's Tale. And then a Animal Crossing from a blind perspective from Brandon Cole. Again, not a game using Wise, but a game that is just very importantly designed with sound in such a way that enables this level of accessibility, and Brandon does a really good job of digging into the specifics of that. So jump into those blogs, and like I said, if you have some ideas, if you're thinking about things, We're open to submissions for all things game audio related. They don't have to be Wwise specific. We're doing this in a way to educate the community. So bring those ideas to us. We'd love to work with you to realize that. So, other piece of this Wwise Up On Air that we try to circle around to is this community spotlight piece. And we have this great community of Wwise authors out there working with Wwise every day and sharing what they're doing with us and with the community in an effort to, again, cool tricks like Alexander and his recreation of rain sound using synth 1 in Wwise. So fully synthesizing the different layers of rain. Just a really cool way to try and leverage the different resources that are available to you. Again, back to Morning Bell, Hao Chenzong, he put together a Unity tech demo that leverages the pure data heavy pipeline that's available out there to implement some Unity-based bit crushing and glitch features in a 3D simulation that he created. And then Andy George dug in deep. He was on a quest to uncover the details of sample rate versus memory across different compression settings using Wwise. And so he built this entire blog. He's got a bunch of tables and resources. And you should be checking out the chat right now because we're dropping links to that stuff there for you to explore after this live stream. So thanks to all the folks out there in the community who are building and sharing these resources for using Wwise. But what else, you might be asking yourself, Damien? What else indeed? And as part of that 2019.2.4 point release, we're releasing the mastering. It's going to be available as a free cross-platform plugin today. All you have to do is sign up. And I want to quote Martin Klein, Audiokinetic CEO. This release is especially exciting because the mastering suite is our first intercompany collaboration since Audiokinetic's acquisition by SIE in January 2019. It's a testament to our commitment and promise to our partners and community following the acquisition, and to continue to bring the most innovative audio technology to the industry while maintaining platform neutrality. The release of the mastering suite represents the stepping stone towards future collaborations leveraging the Sony ecosystem with Audiokinetic towards continued advancements in audio technology that benefit the industry at large. And so it really is a suite of plugins available in parametric equalizer, 4-band compressor, master volume, and limiter, all wrapped up in the Wwise UI. Some really cool looking graphs and colors coming to the interface that I'm really excited about the usability and accessibility of. So I encourage you to jump in and grab that new release of Wwise and get your hands on this right away. Yeah, someone in the chat is mentioning it's got a fab filter kind of feel. Yeah, I think we've all used fab filter. That's an awesome EQ. And I think in games and in interactive audio, we're reaching for that level of accessibility, right? So grab it, drop it in, and get to mastering with the new Mastering Suite plugin. So without further ado, I want to bring on our special guests, and we're going to be talking today with, Andy Rorman and Eduardo Ortiz Frau. Hey. Yeah, great to have you. So glad that you could join us here for this exciting, in-depth conversation about the work that you've done on Afterparty. I got a bit of an adventure game history to me as well. I did a bunch of work on adventure games as I was freelancing, coming up in the industry. And so things like Afterparty are super exciting to me. It's definitely my jam. So thanks for joining us today.
Awesome.
Cool.
My pleasure.
Yeah, cool. So let's start with a little bit of introduction. If I could introduce Andy, you know, we're here together in Seattle, actually, together apart, my friend. But why don't you just a little bit about how you arrived in game audio and the kind of the path that brought you here?
Sure. Yeah. So previous to working in games, I was already writing music for film and TV. And it was just kind of coincidences. One being that I met your old boss, Guy Whitmore, at our local coffee shop because we're neighbors. And he overheard me talking about music, and we got to talking, and he eventually invited me out to Microsoft to give a presentation about how I actually performed live with Ableton Live, and that led to working on the Crackdown 2 team on a couple remixes for the soundtrack. And from there, just kind of more things came in. And then with Night School, it was, again, kind of through a mutual friend that we met, and we worked first together on Oxenfree and just developed a good working relationship and have worked on every Night School project since.
Excellent. And Oxenfree, that's such a deep well that maybe we'll circle back to at the end. Because, yeah, what a debut from that studio, and what a cool project. And so that leads me to introducing Eduardo. Eduardo, again, like a deep history of indie games. Tell us a little bit about the path that you've taken.
Well, like many sound designers, I started also in music. You know, I did like a decade of trying to just make a living of the music industry as an audio engineer, composer, that kind of thing, right? But then I got tired of being poor. I was in Puerto Rico, and I needed a way to actually make a living. And I finished some classes in one of those like tech schools that they kind of like go through classes pretty fast. And one of the months of the course was like game audio, right? And that was my intro to game audio. It was like a very basic intro, but after that I came to Austin, and I knew it was something, you know, I wanted to just look into. And then I met the right people, and I started working with this guy, Robin Arnott. He's another sound designer now. He makes his own games, and the point is, I started working with him, and one of the first projects we did together was the Stanley Parable, which became a very big success. Yeah. And from there, I just kind of like started getting to know a lot of people, and just kept working, luckily, on really interesting and cool indie games. And yeah, it was like there's a lot of luck involved. You know, like in terms of the people you get to meet, like,
yeah.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like Gorogoa, everything, like these are just excellent examples of the artistry that's available for interactive in our medium. And you have had a chance to really be a part of some cool stuff that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Speaking of Robin, like Sound Self, the game he's been working on for years and years, that kind of came out of his experimentation with Deep Sea, which was a game that you played with a mask over your head in total isolation. So the evolution of that Sound Self is out now for any folks that have had a chance. Yeah, we got someone in the chat room. Deep Sea was terrifying. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. That was an audio only game, right? It was like a horror audio only game. Yeah.
Right. It was like, was it underwater and you controlled it through your breathing, the sound of your breath?
Yeah. Like you use a controller, but whenever you would breathe, there was a mic that would pick it up, and it would play bubbles, like as if you were like a scuba diver.
Yeah.
So that would, if you breathe too much, it would impede your ability to actually hear the monsters around you. So it was a very clever and interesting project by Robin, for sure.
Yeah, totally. And Sound Self, again, is another game where the interaction between audio and visuals is this bi-directional piece where the sound of your voice influences the graphics and the visuals in a way that becomes like a meditative feedback loop. Great experience if folks have a chance to give it a try. Sound Self is definitely worth picking up.
For sure.
Cool. So let's talk Afterparty. Andy, give us a little introduction to how that project kind of started to coalesce and the process of kicking that off.
Sure. So we had finished Oxenfree, had a couple other projects happen. We did a game for Mr. Robot called Exfiltration. And this was kicking around as kind of a buddy comedy idea, which is a rare thing in video games, I think. And was definitely intriguing about a game about drinking your way out of hell. It's like, all right, it's quite a shift from Oxenfree, but I was like, I think I can get into this. But as they described the subject matter and how the game would play out, it became an obvious opportunity to do really cool things with what a score could be and what the soundtrack should be.
Right.
Because it's mostly happening in nightclubs. So we're in a situation where it's like, well, we could have score, or we could just listen to what everybody in the club is listening to. It's a DJ or a live band or what have you. So we kind of started right in on that tact that I would essentially prototype. I like to call it concept art, but for audio, what this world would sound like pretty early in the process, like even to almost gray boxed levels and things.
Yeah, and you're doing these prototypes, which are basically linear sketches of music and kind of just lining them up against visuals as they're evolving from the team.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, for sure.
Freed of the interactivity questions, really just blue skying, like helping to set the tone as well. Like, what's this game what's the vibe?
Yeah. And they are a dialogue heavy studio. They're a narrative based studio. So the other thing I have access to is scripts. So I can look at characters and think about character theming or location theming and things like that pretty early in the process as well. And so it was just starting to carve out an audio environment that matched the overall vibe of the script well, which is, it's bars and it's bar hopping and it's nightclubs. And so there's a lighthearted vibe to it, but you're also in hell. And so that had to contribute in some way thematically as well. Musically, even though we're jumping from a rock club to a nightclub to exterior scenes to a wine bar, you name it, one of the underlying themes is like, well, what kind of hellish things can I thread into all these different musical environments? And so that became a deep dive for me into fictional representations of these things. So everything from what's the music to The Exorcist or The Omen or to Night of the Living Dead, like all these different kind of things that represent horror in genre filmmaking, a little bit of video games, but mostly film, and kind of latching on to those musical elements and then bringing them into all these various contexts.
Did you end up having to, question folks on the team, like what is their own personal representation of the sound of hell? Like, is it broken piano strings, or like I'm sure everyone brings their own interpretation of that.
Yeah, for every, and actually this is really representative of how I work with Night School and most clients, is we essentially share mixtapes at the start of a project, because I begin to envision what this world should sound like, but they do as well. And so Sean, one of the creative leads at Night School, we basically share mixtapes and say, oh, well, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And that can go further than, or broader than what we narrow it down to. So we did go pretty far in directions that could be influences for various things. A good example would be, there's a scene where there's an audition and it's a rap group, and we're like, wow, there's kind of a throwback and they're supposed to be kind of bad, but then they sent me the lines for the raps, and I was like, oh, well, this really reminds me of, like, mid-school, late 80s, early 90s hip-hop, so I'll do like a Bomb Squad-esque production, like Public Enemy or something like that. So we do hit these things that it doesn't sound anything like Hell, but it's one of those things that needed to be brought in for a specific sequence. And then I loop back around and go, okay, are there any hellish elements that I could plug into that musical concept that speak to both of those needs? Yeah. And that's how the entire soundtrack kind of came up. So there's a scene where there's it's essentially, I would call it hardcore punk song, but even that has some kind of Satanish vocals. So we definitely get the Cookie Monster in, but we also get some crazy, like, low choir stuff in there as well.
Nice. Eduardo, I'm wondering if there are any, sound components that you really feel like embodied this idea of hell throughout the score, throughout the game.
Well, I guess for me, a lot of things are more intuitive, in the sense of, like, a big part of this game in terms of sound overall, and like what I enjoyed about it was the music implementation and the ambience and how they work together. So for me, it's less about specific ideas that I have in terms of, like, oh, well, it's hell, so obviously that's the most obvious idea. But then it's just about making the walking around interesting, right? It's like, so it feels dynamic. It feels like you're walking through a living space. That it is, there's changes from area to area, that kind of thing. And a lot of that does involve the music. So from my point of view, again, a big part of what's interesting about this game in terms of audio is the implementation. And it is something I enjoy a lot doing, and I was able to implement, the music for this game. So yeah.
Yeah, and in some ways, you take the palette generated from Andy, the compositions, and as the implementer, let's talk a little bit more about the role that you have then to take that palette and tie it dynamically into the game. I think that's one of the things that we'll be talking about in the example that you're going to share. Is that enmeshing of the musical composition, evolving it to fit the gameplay scenario, and again, dynamically manipulating it in a way that makes it feel right in the game.
Yeah.
Cool. And let's see. Spoiler warnings, I'm sure, right? So folks, if you want to keep it clean and play Afterparty sometime in the future, maybe you want to circle back. Otherwise, game's been out for a while, so we feel pretty confident that digging into this isn't too big of a deal. And then any other trigger warnings? Yes, swearing. I guess we're already talking about hell, so you got to be like down with that. So again, just want to be mindful of people, sensitive. We're talking about a game based in hell today. So strap in. Do you want to run a little clip? Does that feel?
Sure. And I guess I'll run the clip and then talk about the basics of how it was implemented.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right, let's see. Let me know when you can see
We ready?
what I got.
Yep.
Okay, so what we're showcasing is how we implemented the music systems in the specific level, which is Satan's house. And it goes through different areas and the music is continuous, but I guess it gets different treatments in those different areas. So we just want to showcase that. The characters are about to enter an elevator that's going to take them up to the most top floor where the entrance to the house is. And you will see music transition, and I'll explain more a bit later.
Want to skip the hustle and bustle and head straight to Lucifer's?
Satan's, please.
Alrighty, heading on up.
Okay, so something we saw there was basically the transition from having ambient music, and you still hear kind of like the rumble. Like, so just a piece of information, there's a huge party happening at Satan's house, right? So when you're in the bottom, you hear some of the boominess of that, but mainly you're hearing the ambience track. And as you go up, was basically the line to enter the house, then you start hearing more of the party music and less of the ambience music. And then as they go in, you're gonna hear that party music keep going.
And I just want to underline that height piece of it where, yeah, you're going up. Back to that I know later, but
Yeah.
pieces. Okay.
Yes.
Invitations, please.
Certainly. I think you'll find our names in will call.
So I have to edit the video a bit, so if you see jumps, it's just me editing. So okay, so that's a story element, but they enter the party and magically it's gone, but I'm gonna skip that and just kind of like get you back to inside the party, and then you're just gonna walk around the party and you will hear I guess you will hear the music change as they walk around the spaces. That's just an edit.
Is that some lava?
Yes, there was lava. Yeah. Now that was an edit. They're in the patio and they're gonna jump. They're gonna run back in. But basically, here the music turns into more diegetic music, where you still hear the music to the left. And now they're about to enter the party again. So here, it turns more into like 2D music, right? But you still have the elements of the band that are all 3D, and they're playing the same song. He's drinking a bit.
Yeah.
The more he drinks, then the audio also changes. But then he'll go outside and you're gonna hear the continuation. So that's one aspect of the house. Should we explain that? You want to talk a bit more? Should I keep showing the video?
Oh yeah, give us a little bit of what we just saw. So pick it apart.
Andy, you want to jump in to talk about the band stuff, or should I take it away?
Well, I'll just say that it was your idea. So this is one of the things that highlights a good collaboration. The scene was scored, and again, when I say scored, a lot of that is just like, well, what music would they be playing? What Satan play at his house party? And that was it. It's like, it's kind of, you can dance to it, but it's kind of background, and it's got the chanting because he's Satan, and that's what he would listen to. But with the team, we knew there was going to be a band in the space, and I was like, "Hey, can you have them like play at the tempo?" But then, as the music that's playing, just so we can make it make sense. And then Eduardo was like, "Well, why don't we just do different instruments? Like we look at the instruments they're playing, and they're playing a song that is essentially the music you're hearing, but it's those specific instruments playing specific parts." So I wrote a part for each character, and then we made that its own element, looping, synced with the global music, but spatialized, so that as you move to them and away from them, you hear them, off to the left or right, and eventually fade, but still synced with the overall music.
Beautiful. So there's layers in the composition that attenuate positionally based on the band members.
Yeah. And luckily, so that's the kind of thing where I do that. Normally I would have considerations for how those two mesh together, but that I was lucky in that global piece of music was already spacious enough that it allowed for room for like the live drum set and little guitar-y thing and the organ to fit in there. So I actually didn't have to go back and change the original piece much at all to get the other piece in there and mesh.
So were those just layers in the track you had already composed, and then you just kind of separated those out? Or did you go back in and kind of noodle over the top of what you had done already?
Yeah, noodled over the top. And again, and this is, I like to look at the big picture as much as possible. So this was even literally looking at the scene and looking at the characters, like what would that demon play?
Yeah.
And how he's moving. I'm like, oh, that's okay. I get it. It's probably Farfisa or whatever. And then right to that. And it's not overly complex either, since that's a smaller element, it can be a shorter loop.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to have the arrangement of the entire song. So
wait, are there automatones in Hell?
I would say yes, because of what they sound like when I play them.
Yeah.
But no, because they're just too cute and happy.
Right. Maybe deleted scenes, automaton orchestra, but off the hook, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Hard to say.
Because when you were talking about, what instrument would this character be playing? Wow. Yeah, someone out there playing the automaton.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so on the implementation side, Eduardo, like when you had this idea of bringing these instruments into the game space, like where did that come from?
Well, I think that's why it's good for a composer and sound designer to collaborate or be more intimately collaborating, because I feel like they have different focuses, right? Like composers tend to have a bigger picture of emotional content, and sound designers are very detail oriented. A sound designer looks at a specific element in the scene and they wonder whether it needs a sound or not, right? So for me, it's kind of obvious that if there's a band playing, then there needs to be something happening to bring that band to life and not just have it as part of the background. And I think, again, that's kind of like the detail, just like bringing those little details to bring the scene alive, right? So, I mean, yeah, for me, it was pretty straightforward. It's a matter of like, hey, Andy, you want to make something that complements what's happening? And that also highlights kind of like that dance between diegetic and non-diegetic music, where it's both and at the same time, depending on what part of the scene you're looking at, right? Or you're standing on.
Hey, and fancy word alert, diegetic, non-diegetic. Like, let's get a definition on that just for folks who are not up to that vocabulary task.
Sure. Well, I mean, for me, I may have the definition wrong, but to me, it's as simple as it's a sound source within the game, within the world itself, like a speaker, a telephone, that kind of thing, or is it just more like this abstract feeling pasted on top of the world, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I could almost say 2D, 3D, right? The 2D is that non-diegetic component, right? It's just pervasive music that exists There is some positionality and filtering that you're doing based on, scene changes and whatnot, but it is background, right? Whereas this diegetic component that you're bringing to it is tied to, an actor in the world. It has volume fade out based on distance. And so it's rooted in that 3D space, right? Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I just sometimes I take for granted some of the verbiage and vocabulary that we sling around in games and or game audio specifically. So it's good to have.
I mean, I feel like I finally got those definitions right, not that long ago. So
Totally.
yeah.
And luckily, I was considering this pretty early on with this game. As soon as it was obvious that the flow of the game was from these interiors to exteriors, there would have to be consideration into how they interacted. And so exteriors, essentially, we wanted some sort of ambience that almost was sound design. So there's some minimal music for the exterior that acts more as score. But then, like the earlier thing was like, oh, well, what if you go by a food truck and there's like a little radio there? Or you go by a club that you don't go into, but you hear what's booming inside. So one of the early possible solutions was, well, what if it's all like a DJ mix? And so interior, exterior, any sounds you could hear in a particular area would all be essentially beat synced, tempo synced, so that would smooth out some of what could be conflicting musical information and confusing. We really didn't need that because I minimized the exterior so much that became more ambient music, and so it wasn't as crucial to make sure things tempo synced. But the kind of the vestige of that's interesting is that some of the exterior pieces of music are ambient remixes of what you're hearing in a club. So there's still a relationship. It's just not as tight as original, just because it wasn't needed from a technical standpoint.
Gotcha. Question from the chat coming in on the topic of diegetic and non-diegetic, and I'm not sure if that term applies only to music, but what about a sound panned around the listener, gust of wind? Are we considering that a diegetic sound?
For me, it is, because it's part of the world. Meaning, it's a literal part of the world that you are. If it's a game you're inhabiting, or if it's a movie, as a viewer, you're still inhabiting that world, right? Kind of like.
Yeah, and you could almost make the case that non-diegetic wind would be wind that exists all the time, and diegetic wind is wind that you get close to the edge of the cliff, and it's positional and it's linked to a space. It's dynamic, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think one way I think about it is it literal or is it abstract? I mean, is it literally happening in the world, or is it not literally happening? It's just something we're pasting on top of it.
Yeah.
I've only ever considered the term with respect to music, but yeah, that's definitely a relevant thought. And I can think of one specific example I know this is crazy specific, but in Spike Lee's Malcolm X, there's a transition scene from Malcolm sitting, I think, reading a book, to the news that JFK has been shot, and so they punctuate things he's doing with the gunshots. So you're not seeing the JFK getting shot scene, you're seeing Malcolm X, but they're using gunshots for these to punctuate the sequence. So those aren't gunshots that are in that room.
Right.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's sound design that is not diegetic, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're just unpacking these terms here today on Wise Up On Air. It's great to have questions from the chat. Thanks for that one. It's good to be here. So what about cracking the hood on this music system and taking a look a little deeper? What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, sure. So unfortunately, I won't be able to show the Unity side of it, but I'll explain kind of like what's happening as best as I can.
Great.
So a bit, I don't know if this is, how do you say, blasphemous, but A lot of the music is actually not implemented using music systems. There is a lot of music that is, but there is a lot of music that isn't. This is part of what isn't. This is just basically they're all implemented as general loops or ambiances, and it's because the logic is fairly simple. There are multiple tracks being triggered at the same time, and as long as they are being triggered at the same time, it means that they will stay in sync across the different parts of the scene. Like when you're outside, that's a different track that's being played. When you go inside, it transitions seamlessly into a different track that's being played, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that using music in the actor mixer hierarchy is totally cool, right? The reasons for using the music system, when you're familiar with it, things like tempo information, transitions between different cues, those all make sense. And like you said, the implementation that you wanted to achieve here is better served up in the actor mixer. And so I think it's great. So
yeah,
we're looking at the folder that contains...
So we're looking at, this is Walking Way, which is basically the area that they're at. When I showed the video initially, they are in Walking Way.
Great.
So this is exterior versus interior, which is Satan's house.
Yep.
So for exterior, we have two tracks, which I mentioned. There was the normal background music track, which is played at the bottom, and then it gets faded out, basically with a height parameter, which I'll explain that in a second. And then we got Satan's music, which is just one track, and there's also the height parameter. We got three different things happening with that track. But what I did for base ambience and music implementation in the world, I relied less on predefined 3D settings, and I made this graph of height and length, like X and Y, and there's an object that I throw on the scene, on every scene in Unity, that gives me the point of 0.
Yeah.
And then we got positive Y, so height, and then positive X.
Yep.
Right, which is just like however length is that level, right? So that it's 2D basically, right? Because it's only two dimensions. But for a game like this, it works. And then this level has depth, which I will show. Satan's House does have a depth, so I have to change to a different set of ambiances and music, which is also done seamlessly.
Cool.
Which actually, let me show that real fast, so that it's not conceptual.
Bus drivers for
So they are walking with Satan, and they're following him. You're gonna hear them talk, and they're walking to the back of the house. So there's a change here, which you might notice because the band lowers a bit in volume, and that's intentional. But the idea is music and ambience it all seamlessly transitions.
Yeah, we could have been strangling bus drivers.
So this is the front of the house.
Children, look now. I am your humble servant.
That's the back of the house now.
I worshipped your pores while you were still
so again,
on the wall.
it's very seamless, right? But then that has its own thing happening, and I will show that here. So okay, and we got exterior, right? This is the ambience, and this is the party music, and then we have Satan's House. We got front and back and front, right?
Yeah, and I just want to say, having those parameters to reach for the height and for the, left to right in a side-scrolling adventure game, having that depth, just those three parameters must unlock a ton of different potential for you parametrically.
Yes, and it feels very intuitive for me to do this because it's also very custom, where it's I don't set just a specific 3D settings that I apply to everything. It's very much how do I want this transition from this space to this other space feel?
Yep.
Then I just make it, right? So right now we're seeing the height, which I will explain in a second, but let's see. So the front, this is the band stems, right? We have a guitar, and drums. So this is the distance, which is basically the X. And right now for the band, it's pretty simple. It's just low pass and volume, right? So the beginning of the level is this left part, which is kind of like that little intro room. Then it opens up, and then we hear the full band, and you will start to walk away, and then that's what happens.
Got it.
Yeah.
And that's just a blend container with a couple of tracks in it playing simultaneously, like you said, the drums and the
guitar.
Cool.
Which I guess the harpsichord is not on right now. I don't know. I can't remember if we just turned it off completely because it was too distracting, or if for some reason in the Wise project we just don't have it on right now.
Oh yeah.
But
Now I'm recalling. Yeah, maybe it was just annoying. So
yeah, I think it soloed a lot, and it was like we get distracted. But then we have the actual kind of like music, the music track, which is not like the band.
Got it.
And we got 3D, right? Like 3D 2D mix, which is this one. We got low pass, and we got 2 different sets of volumes, one based on height and one based on distance. So it's like we got X and Y.
Great.
And it's the same thing. It's just going through the level, and it's affecting, the music in different ways.
Those are some beautiful custom artisanal curves. And it is an art, right? To get those transitions the way that you hear them, right? In your head. And
yeah, exactly.
And so there's no like S curve, log curve that you're just going to throw on something and be done, right? As artists, I think it is that level of detail that you bring to, authoring those curves and smoothing out those relationships that really brings your vision to life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just one of the things I find satisfying, right? Is getting something to feel, right? And then you just get to enjoy walking around once you dialed in the parameters, right?
Totally.
And if you want to know what we're looking at here, so this is basically, this is I guess, I don't know if you call this a parlor, but he's walking, right? And that would be this initial part right here.
Got it.
And then through the party, it stays here. Let's see. And then as it starts to transition to the outside, then this is the transition to the outside.
Great.
So, okay. Then the next thing we got, oops, that's not what I want to do, is going up. So that's distance, that's X, but we also have the characters go up. And I mentioned that it transitions to the back of the house. So we got the band as well, and we got parlor music, which they're gonna go into this little room, and then we got the music track. But basically,
servant,
I'll show them walking.
I worshipped your pores while you were still in the womb, but you don't know what soup you're ordering here.
Well, how do we prove we can do this?
Who the fuck is texting me right? Oh, good gravy, it's
Sorry,
Beazle still on me about those unholy
swearing.
reports.
Well, what do you expect? Guy can't turn off.
Polly was crawling at my butt too tonight, preaching about God knows what.
So they're going up now.
Actually,
and as we
okay,
leave
I've
the
developed
floor,
a notion.
I'm turning, obviously,
you can
I'm
help
turning
me
kind
out.
of like the crowd
You can help me out and prove you can handle our
turning
little
up the
test of endurance.
reverb of the music
Interested?
and everything else.
Cool.
Sure. Okay. Well, what is it?
Track down my brothers and sisters, the
And then
original
here, I'll speed it up a
monarchs.
tiny bit.
Like me, you'll be granting me a small favor. You'll be getting them temporarily off my behind.
So they're about to walk
Also
to a different
proving
room.
you can party with beings
Which has
who
different
use
music
stars
on.
as rushlights.
That's an edit, so just ignore that. Then we got... That's an edit as well.
Yep.
But basically, this is where they play poker, and it's playing a different version of that music that is playing in the party.
There was a lot to unpack there.
What the
And it's
hell
all
is he
done
talking about?
through the same XY
What, just saying that we
system.
didn't do enough, that we
Now
were...
they're gonna-
Heard.
now they're
Not every
gonna
damn
go
day.
all
How
the
hard
way
would it be to
down.
get 2 recommendations?
I mean, I got 5 for my college applications, but we have no idea where these monarchs are or how to find them.
Oh, you know who would know?
There's an edit coming, they're gonna keep running. And now they're transitioning back into this set of music and ambiances. but it's pretty seamless.
And then we have the depth here at the end again. Yep.
Yeah, so now they're gonna come out and you're gonna see the transition to outside better now. So there's a filter when the door is open, and when it closes, the filter shuts.
Nice.
Want to go all the way to the bottom or take the long way?
Express, please. The full ride.
You got it. Check your ankles, wallet chains, purses. Okay.
Like comedy in a video game any day.
Yeah, Fornius already told me.
So
I don't
so now
think I can-
we're like basically not hearing the party music anymore, and we're hearing the ambience. And what's happening also to the party music, it's got a reverb, which is also affected by the height. This now we're talking exterior, right? So when you're in the bottom of the level, this is what you hear. So I don't. Hopefully,
Yeah,
you
we can hear
that.
it. Great.
So it's very boomy. It's just basically a lot of reverb, boominess. That is, it just becomes part of the ambience, right? And as you are going up, so what the things that are happening here, we got reverb level, right? Decay time, dry level, early reflections. But another thing that's happening is, I don't want to do that. Is going from 2D to 3D.
Yeah.
So it's 2D at the bottom. It's just general boominess, and then it goes, and now you can identify that it's coming from the house. And as you get closer to the door, you hear that panic, etc.
Down from the party, right? So smooth, right? You made it sound easy in that moment, right? And obviously we're seeing some of the implementation here behind the scenes, and there's a lot to unpack from that whole sequence that you went through, right? We have the outdoor area, just illustrated. Have interior progression from front to back, that depth piece. The whole world flips as they walk up, which is pretty cool. And then we have the different transitions between musics. And so outside we have one music. Inside we have a different version of that.
Yeah.
And then even more when they're playing poker, that's yet another version. So Andy, what was the process of bringing up those areas?
All right, let me stop that music, guys.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
And I was muted, so. Yeah, so this actually brings up something that's really, really interesting. One is I always, since I come from a lot of remix background and whatnot, I'm pretty comfortable with that. So like in Satan's parlor, like, oh, the joke is, yes, outwardly Satan listens to some pretty hellish dance music, but in his parlor he's listening to like the cheesy, like cocktail lounge version of whatever that is. So there's those kinds of things. But one of the things that was most interesting about this is the variety of reverbs and all these spaces. And that's a big thing with live music and DJs and club culture, is you're always hearing it in these weird non-optimal spaces. And so that is so informative for how these should sound per area. And I was pretty fastidious about it, that while we are using a lot of Wwise reverbs for the dynamic aspects, some of these are just baked with their room sound in the piece.
Yep.
And that is because I'm like, okay, I need this room. And that became so integral that when it came to making the soundtrack for people to listen to separately on Spotify or whatever, a lot of that, it's definitely dialed down, but a lot of those reverbs then became part of the actual final song sound, just because I love it, and it's just so much a part of what the game is that I couldn't just then get rid of all the reverb and just give you kind of clean sounding versions of all these things. And like I said, so it's dialed down. Some of them, it might just be on the drums or something.
Yep.
But if you go back and listen to the soundtrack separately, you'll notice a lot of that cavernous kind of boominess is then woven in to the final pieces of music. And that comes from this back and forth of like designing for the game, what the game is, Eduardo's like working with it dynamically with Wise, and then just letting that inform kind of the process from very start to the very end.
Cool. And I love the way that, the room, so to speak, this virtual space that the developers build becomes a piece of the core sound of a track, right? It's almost like a fifth Beatle, right? Contributing to the outcome.
Yeah. And
I
so
kind of want to...
I was going to say, even in the writing process, so I have then those reverbs as presets. I use Ableton Live using their convolution reverb. So it's just a preset I could turn on and off even while I'm writing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. What does it sound like in a deep cavernous room? And that, the kick drum needs to be dialed back or something.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to illustrate an example of that, of one of the tracks that is pure. It only purely plays through a car. Car speakers when they're in the taxi, and that's what you hear. So I kind of want to show that.
Cool.
Real fast.
Saints house party. That's you guys are doing well. You're doing good. I don't have any poppers or noisemakers.
Hey, I mean, we couldn't have done it without your help.
Basically, the only way you're hearing that song in the game itself will be with the treatment of like car boombox stereo type of deal.
Yeah, exactly.
A fun non-Easter egg for that was we even did an individual audio track for what the vibrating car would sound like. When a booming car goes by and you hear like the rattling, like license plate holder or whatever it is. So I even did that. I forget what I did for the design, but literally recorded something vibrating to the track. And it was cool, but it also was distracting in the way it was like, it didn't quite make sense in the game. It just sounded like something was broken. So I believe that got deleted, right?
If I remember correctly, it did not make it in game. Yes.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the reason why. Maybe it was just too distracting or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was too distracting. But that's the level of detail.
Yeah.
I like to invest myself in, however stupid.
We can find out right now. Taxi scene, music taxi scene, and maybe not. I guess it probably did not make it then.
Yeah, it was either on the creative direction side where I killed it before we tried it, or it went in and just was like, now it's just distracting. Because, from what was already happening with the music track, you understood the feel that it was coming from the car.
Yeah. Cool. Question from the chat coming in for Eduardo. To implement that height and length filter, did you get that point of origin, the return in Unity, or is that something you were still like?
I requested
Unity?
No. I had to. The programmers they made an object that would give me origin, and then I would just place that object in the scene, right? And that object would just give Wise 0 and 0. Cool.
Thanks for the question and answer. Again, I think one of the great things about this live streaming format is to be able to answer those kind of questions in real time, because you guys are dropping great science. It's cool to hear the level of detail that you go to deliver on the audio for these environments and in the music. So it's cool.
And there are limits to that system, in the sense that, as you saw when I had to go with depth, especially when what's happening in the back of the house is way different that's happening in the front, where you have the height and then you have like a whole different room. But there's simple workarounds. I just pretty much switched to a different set of ambiences and music, and it was seamless, as you saw. So it wasn't too hard to do that.
Yeah. Cool. Another question coming in, and definitely now is a good time to get them to us. Andy, Eduardo, do you see yourself often making the use of MIDI within Wwise? Is that something you've experimented with? Have you dug in on that at all?
Yeah,
Me, no.
Okay.
Short and sweet answer is nope, I have not.
Got it.
I know people, you, Damien included, who have done extensive work with MIDI and Wwise, and it's very impressive, but yeah, not something I've done.
Cool. Eduardo,
Me
you touched
is
it?
yes and no, in the sense of I am making my first game at the moment, and I'm doing it in Unreal because I don't code, but with Unreal, you have blueprints and visual script, that kind of visual programming. I like it, and I find it intuitive. So the reason why, and I am doing basically a music making game, and I am using MIDI, but sadly, Wwise does not have MIDI in exposed to blueprints. It only has MIDI out. So it's like you can send MIDI info to Unreal, but not MIDI info from Unreal to Wwise. So that's the only reason why I have not tried it, because I did want to use Wwise in the game. But because I don't code, that meant that I needed to find somebody who would then go into the Wwise code and to make that happen. So that is actually a feature request.
And we got open ears here for that kind of stuff. Again, we're actively, evolving these features as we move forward through time to try and bring that kind of accessibility to you on the authoring side, right? There's a ton of stuff that, that we have enabled sound designers and composers to access through Wwise, but some stuff is still buried under the hood, and so it's great to hear how you're trying to use it, and we're always open to hearing more about what that's like. I'll point folks to that blog that I tipped off at the beginning of the hour from Aaron Brown talking about Wwise and MIDI. This is a great opportunity to dig deeper into that. Again, a lot of power in that system, especially when we talk about leveraging the ability to quickly transition between segments of MIDI, swap out entire sample sets. When we talk about transposing, there's this game that I helped composer Becky Allen implement called Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, and she called it the Barry Manilow lift, right? To take that entire MIDI composition and just transpose it up a notch and get that sweet lift out of it that Barry Manilow is famous for, without having to go back into the DAW or composition and recompose for that. This was just hey, it's a parameter. We just pass that in at this point of the gameplay, and everything fell in line with it, right? Or we can just swap a sample set here and go from one character's harpsichord to another character's automaton, right? It was so that kind of flexibility that MIDI brings is powerful, but it does require commitment across both parties, composer and integrations, to be able to leverage that kind of flexibility and design for that method of playback. But
sure.
But yeah, it's a fun one. We'd love to hear more from folks who are using MIDI out there. If you have any feedback, drop us a line. Always happy to hear from the community. So thanks for those questions. And I think I'm going to close it out, but I first wanted to circle back to Night School. This was a developer who, from game one with Oxenfree, had a very high level of commitment for audio. Oxenfree, the work that you did on that, Andy, some really cool stuff. I'm thinking about the radio implementation. I'm thinking about some of the cool, hidden messages that you baked into WAV files, right? You just want to talk a little bit more about that collaboration with the developer, and Eduardo, as well as if you have insights on how working with the developer to bring across sound at such a high level of detail with such a creative approach. I'm just interested in a little bit more about that, because I think it sounds like a dream.
Sure.
It
Andy, you want to start?
it kind of is. I'm extremely thankful to for my collaboration with them, because they do. Not only is it steady work, but it is a collaboration that allows for a lot of that creative thinking, and we even have our kind of work structure, or work collaboration set up in a way that really fosters it, which is essentially a retainer as opposed to even per project billing cycle. And what that does is it loosens me from the, I got to make X minutes of music in X amount of hours, to essentially being able to experiment with concepts. And that's what made the approach to Oxenfree deeper than maybe it could have been otherwise. But also, even Afterparty, is it doesn't have those same sorts of secret messages in it. And this is just because of creative relevance. But it does have another kind of in-joke with Satanist stuff is, that Judas Priest record has backwards Satan worshipping. So there might be some of that in this game. But those kinds of ideas, this collaboration allows for.
Yeah.
And so we have a little time before production really kicks into gear to experiment. And some of those might get thrown out, which is good, because you're keeping other things you come across. So I'm just really fortunate that not only that we're still working together, and I've scored every game they've done, and that is a really, really rare thing. So yeah,
and involved early, right? That's the other piece of it.
Involved early, which is like, I can't say anymore, but yes, there are more things to come with this collaboration that I'm really excited about.
Cool.
Nice.
And then from you,
All
Eduardo, kind of walking hand in hand through production, again, like project, as you're kind of giving and taking and ebbing and flowing creatively.
Yeah, well, okay. For me, one of the things to keep in mind always is every team is gonna give you different things, right? Every team has different limitations, and I feel like my job, whether because I want it to be or not, is always trying to push those limits, just because obviously, you want to make the best work that you can. So it's like, it's pushing as much as you can, and then without pushing too much. So it's like, conceptually, I mean, I've been lucky to receive a lot of freedom in terms of, like, I've worked in many different kinds of games. So it's just like, I tend to think about whatever I want. I talk about with the developers, and usually, they usually don't have anything against my ideas, right? When it comes to implementation, that's when it's like, it's more a direct collaboration.
Yeah.
It's like a give and take, and it's a lot of back and forth. And again, for me, I hope that I never come across as too pushy, because I know I can be, right? Because I know I want to implement all the systems, and I want them to be amazing. And like, the reality is, we're working with small teams, and we're all doing the best we can together. But there's limitations that come with it. So it's just dancing that line of pushing, but not too much.
Exactly, and we're creative and passionate, and I think, it's great to see that level of detail in your Wise project, that hand-done artistry. And I'm sure if we had unpacked your composition sessions as well, we would see that same level of detail, and we've heard a bunch about it. But that hand-done piece and what Wise allows you to accomplish is truly stunning. It's great. Thanks so much for sharing with us today. The production, I think, I'm so glad to be able to have a platform to share that with folks. Really cool work, really cool stuff.
Absolutely, and thanks for having us. This has been great.
Definitely. It's been super fun. It gets, old creative juices flowing. Like, I get to revisit this awesome project. So yeah, thank you for having us.
Great. Thanks for joining in the chat. Don't forget to drop back by on Thursday of next week, same time. It's noon Pacific, 3 o'clock East time. And we look forward to digging into spatial audio with the Wwise Adventure game and the Reflect plugin, talking about early reflections. So that should be a good time. Again, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Great to see everyone today, and stay good out there. Stay safe. Wear your mask, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.